My phone rang at exactly 10:43 on a Tuesday morning, and somehow, even before I answered it, I knew my life was about to split in two, the before and the after. I was standing in the cereal aisle at Kroger, trying to decide between the store brand and the one I'd been buying for 30 years, when Maria's name lit up my screen. Sweet Maria, the cleaning lady I'd hired just 2 months before to help me keep up my little house. She was calling during work hours, which she never did. My hand trembled as I brought the phone to my ear. "Miss Eleanor?" Her voice was barely a whisper, tight with fear. "There's someone in your house." Time stopped. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to buzz louder. A woman pushed her cart past me, and I could hear every squeak of the wheels, every breath in my lungs. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, though my heart already knew, already understood that something terrible was unfolding in the place I'd finally started to call home. "I came in through the back door like always," Maria continued, and I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "I was going to start in the kitchen, but I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy ones. Walking around in your bedroom. Miss Eleanor, I'm hiding in the bathroom downstairs. The door is locked, but I'm scared. What if they heard me come in?" My groceries forgotten, I was already moving toward the exit, my sensible shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "Stay right where you are, baby. Don't make a sound. I'm calling the police right now, and I'm coming home." My fingers fumbled with my purse, with my car keys, with the weight of understanding that someone was in my house, in my bedroom, going through my things. But it wasn't just the violation that made my chest tight and my vision swim. It was the knowing, deep in my bones, that this wasn't random, that this had something to do with the family I'd given 40 years of my life to, with the inheritance I'd never asked for but had finally accepted, with secrets I'd kept buried for so long I'd almost convinced myself they didn't matter. I got behind the wheel of my old Honda, that faithful car that had carried me to work and back for 15 years, and I drove toward my house with my heart hammering against my ribs. The police dispatcher's voice in my ear told me to wait, not to go inside, to let the officers handle it. But Maria was in there, alone, afraid. And if there's one thing 40 years of caring for other people's children taught me, it's that you don't leave someone behind when they need you. Not ever. Not even when every instinct screams at you to run the other way. You need to understand how I got here to understand what that phone call meant. I've been a nanny since I was 23 years old, fresh-faced and full of dreams that didn't quite match the world I was born into. I grew up in a little town in Georgia where my mama cleaned houses and my daddy worked at the mill until it closed down and took half the town's hope with it. I was supposed to be the one who made it out, who went to college and became a teacher or a nurse. I had the grades, the ambition, the fire in my belly. But life has a way of writing its own story, doesn't it? My daddy got sick my second year of college, and the medical bills swallowed our savings like a hungry beast. I came home to help, telling myself it would just be for a semester, maybe 2. But semesters turned into years, and by the time Daddy passed, I was 23 with half a degree and no clear path forward. That's when I saw the ad in the newspaper. A family in Nashville looking for a live-in nanny. Good pay, room and board included. The Harrington needed someone to care for their twin daughters while both parents worked demanding jobs. I took the bus up there with one suitcase and a heart full of hope that felt almost reckless. The Harrington were good people. Mr. Robert was a lawyer, Mrs. Patricia a doctor, and those twin girls, Emma and Grace, became the first children I truly loved. I learned to braid their red hair, to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, to sing them to sleep with lullabies my mama had sung to me. I watched them grow from toddlers to kindergartners to confident little girls who called me Ellie and climbed into my lap when they were sad. I thought I'd found my calling, my purpose. But when the twins turned 7, Mrs. Patricia decided to work from home, and suddenly they didn't need a full-time nanny anymore. They let me go with tears and apologies and a reference letter that praised my dedication. It was the first time I understood that being someone's family didn't make you family. That no matter how much love you poured into other people's children, you were still just passing through their lives. Over the next 37 years, I worked for 6 different families. Some for just a year or 2, others for stretches that felt like a lifetime. I raised children who grew up and moved away and sent me Christmas cards with pictures of grandchildren I'd never meet. I learned to pack light, to guard my heart, to remember that every job had an expiration date. But through it all, I saved. Every penny I could spare went into a bank account that grew slowly but steadily. I didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't take vacations. I lived in other people's homes and dreamed of having my own. The Carmichael family was my last placement, and by the time I started with them, I was 58 years old and bone-tired. They had one son, David, who was 12 and struggling after his parents' messy divorce. Mr. James had custody, and he worked long hours at his tech company. Leaving David alone too much, angry too often, I moved into their guest room and set about the work of raising another child who wasn't mine. David was difficult in the way that hurt children often are. He tested boundaries, pushed limits, said cruel things designed to wound. But underneath all that anger was a scared little boy who missed his mother and didn't understand why his world had fallen apart. I loved him the way I'd loved all the others, with the fullness of a heart that had never had children of its own. I taught him to cook, helped him with his homework, sat with him through his nightmares. Slowly, over months and then years, he softened. Started calling me Miss Eleanor with respect instead of sarcasm. Started seeking me out when he was troubled instead of lashing out. By the time he graduated high school, we had something that felt almost like the family I'd always wanted. Mr. James, and I developed a comfortable partnership over those years. He was a quiet man, still healing from his divorce, grateful for my steadiness. We'd sit together sometimes after David went to bed, sharing tea and small talk, 2 lonely people keeping each other company in the spaces between our real lives. He never remarried, and I think part of him settled into the routine we'd created, coming home to a cooked meal, to a clean house, to the sounds of life happening around him. When David left for college, Mr. James asked me to stay on as his housekeeper. The pay was good, and I was 65 by then, too old to start over with a new family. So I stayed, cleaning rooms that stayed clean, cooking meals for one man who ate quickly and returned to his office. It was peaceful in a way, but also hollow. Like living in a house where all the children had grown up and moved away, leaving only echoes. Then came the day that changed everything. Mr. James had a heart attack at his office, sudden and severe. He survived, thank God, but it scared him badly. Scared him enough that he called David home and asked me to sit with him while his lawyer drew up new estate papers. "Eleanor," he said, his voice still weak from the hospital stay, "I've been thinking about what matters. About who's been there through everything. David's taken care of in the will, of course. But you've given me 7 years of your life. And I've given you nothing permanent in return." I tried to protest, but he raised his hand to stop me, that familiar gesture I'd seen him use in business meetings. "I'm leaving you the guest house," he said simply. "It's small, but it's on the property, and it's paid for. When I'm gone, or if I ever need to sell the main house, it's yours. No strings, no conditions. Just a home that's finally your own." I cried that day, sitting in Mr. James's study with his lawyers scribbling notes and David watching me with gentle eyes. I cried because at 65 years old, after 42 years of living in other people's spaces, I was finally going to have a place that belonged to me. A door I could lock, walls I could paint, a garden I could tend without permission. Mr. James recovered and moved to Arizona 6 months later, seeking dry air and a fresh start. David helped me move my few belongings into the guest house, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage with a porch and a view of the old oak tree I'd sat under so many times during my years with the family. For the first time in my life, I was home. The trouble started small, the way trouble often does. It started with David calling me 3 months after I'd settled into my new life. He called late in the evening, which was unusual. David was considerate about time zones, careful not to disturb me. But that night, his voice on the phone was tight, stressed in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager dealing with his parents' divorce. "Miss Eleanor," he said, skipping the usual pleasantries, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My stomach clenched. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" There was a long pause, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "Did my father seem confused to you before he moved? Did he seem like himself?" The question caught me off guard. Your daddy had been through a lot with a heart attack, but his mind was sharp as ever. "Why are you asking me this?" David let out a long breath. "Because I just got a call from Aunt Rebecca. She's contesting the will. She's claiming Dad wasn't in his right mind when he gave you the guest house, that you manipulated him somehow. She says the property should stay in the family." The words hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca was Mr. James's older sister, a woman I'd met maybe 3 times in 7 years. She lived in California, rarely called, never visited. But apparently, now that property was involved, family ties suddenly mattered. "David, I had never asked your father for anything," I said, hearing my voice shake despite my efforts to stay calm. "He offered it to me." The liar was right there. "I know, Miss Eleanor. I believe you. But Aunt Rebecca has money for lawyers, and she's threatening to tie this up in court for years. She's saying that Dad was vulnerable after the heart attack, that you took advantage of his gratitude. She's painting a picture that makes you look like he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Like the help who got above her station. Like a gold digger who preyed on a sick old man. Like someone who didn't deserve what she'd been given because she hadn't been born into the right family. What do I do?" I asked, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. "I can't afford liars, David. I've been living on Social Security and what little I saved." "If she takes this to court, let me handle it," David said firmly. "I'll talk to her. I'll make it clear that I support Dad's decision, that I was there when he made it. She won't want to fight both of us." But even as he said it, I heard the doubt in his voice. The knowledge that family fights over inheritance have a way of getting ugly, of revealing truths people had been hiding for years. The next few weeks were tense. David called every few days with updates. Rebecca was being stubborn, claiming she had medical records that showed Mr. James's judgment was impaired. She'd hired a lawyer who specialized in elder law, who was building a case around undue influence and cognitive decline. The fact that I'd been Mr. James's employee made it worse, apparently. The power dynamic, they called it. As if 7 years of honest work and genuine care could be reduced to something ugly and manipulative. I tried to go about my life normally. I tended my little garden, planting tomatoes and zinnias in the plot behind the cottage. I joined the church choir, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was working. I made friends with my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, a widow who brought me homemade dumplings and taught me to play mahjong. But the worry sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy and constant. What if I lost this place? Where would I go? How would I start over at 65 with nothing but a suitcase and fading references from families who'd moved on without me? That's when I decided to hire Maria. I'd seen her flyer at the grocery store. House cleaning, reasonable rates, references available. My cottage was small enough that I could clean it myself, but I was tired. Tired in my bones, tired in my soul. And having someone else there, even just for a few hours a week, made the place feel less empty, made me feel less alone with my worries. Maria was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that reminded me of my mama's. She'd emigrated from El Salvador 15 years ago, working her way up from restaurant kitchens to starting her own small cleaning business. She had 3 children and a husband who worked construction, and she moved through my cottage with an efficiency born of necessity. We didn't talk much at first, just pleasantries about the weather and whether I wanted the windows opened. But gradually, over Tuesday morning cleanings, we began to share pieces of our lives. She told me about her children, about the daughter who wanted to be a doctor and the son who struggled in school. I told her about the families I'd raised, the children who'd become lawyers and teachers and parents themselves. We were 2 women who'd spent our lives caring for others, and there was comfort in that shared understanding. I didn't tell her about Rebecca's lawsuit, didn't want to burden her with my troubles, didn't want to admit out loud how scared I was. But I think she sensed something was wrong in the way that women who've known hardship often can. She'd linger sometimes after her work was done, accepting my offer of tea, telling me stories that made me laugh until my sides hurt. She became more than my cleaning lady. She became my friend. Then came the Tuesday everything changed. I'd needed groceries, had debated waiting until Maria finished her cleaning, but the fridge was nearly empty and I didn't want to impose by asking her to pick things up for me. So I left her a note on the kitchen counter, told her I'd be back by 11, told her to help herself to the coffee I'd left brewing. I'd been gone maybe 30 minutes when she called, when she whispered those words that made my blood run cold. "There's someone in your house." As I drove home, breaking every speed limit, my mind raced through possibilities. A burglar? But how? I lived in a quiet neighborhood and it was mid-morning. Someone looking for drug money? But there was nothing of value in my cottage, no expensive electronics, no jewelry worth stealing, unless they were looking for something specific. Unless this had nothing to do with random crime and everything to do with Rebecca's lawsuit. Unless someone was trying to find something they could use against me. Some evidence that I'd manipulated Mr. James, some proof that I didn't deserve the home he'd given me. The thought made me sick, but it also made a terrible kind of sense. If Rebecca could prove I was dishonest, if she could find anything in my personal papers or my history that painted me as untrustworthy, it would strengthen her case. And I had kept papers, hadn't I? Letters from Mr. James thanking me for my care of David, the deed to the cottage. My savings account statement showing I'd never taken more than my salary. I pulled onto my street to find 2 police cars already there, lights flashing but no sirens. An officer approached as I stumbled out of my car, my legs shaky beneath me. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner?" "Yes, I'm Eleanor Washington." "My cleaning lady is inside. Is she okay?" "Did you find whoever?" "She's fine, ma'am. We got her out safely." And we caught the intruder trying to leave through the back door. The officer's expression was strange, a mix of professionalism and something else. Pity, maybe. Or discomfort. "We need you to identify him, ma'am." "He claims he knows you." My heart stopped. What? They led me toward the second police car and through the window. I saw him, David Carmichael, the boy I'd raised. The young man I'd loved like a son, sitting in the back of a police car with his hands cuffed behind him. His head was down, but when he heard us approach, he looked up, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Guilt, shame, and underneath it, a desperation that made him look young again, like the 12-year-old boy who'd been so angry at the world. They took David inside the police station, and I followed in a daze, Maria beside me, her hand gripping mine like a lifeline. The officer, a woman named Detective Barnes with gray threading through her dark hair, sat us down in a small room that smelled of coffee and old carpet. "Miss Washington," she began gently, "we need to understand what happened here. Your cleaning lady called 911 reporting an intruder. When officers arrived, they found Mr. Carmichael in your bedroom with a duffel bag containing various documents. Financial records, correspondence, the deed to your property. He had a key to your house. Can you explain that?" My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "I gave David a spare key years ago," I said slowly. "When I first moved in case of emergencies. He's the closest thing to family I have." "Why would he? He's asking to speak with you," Detective Barnes interrupted. "You don't have to agree to it. We have enough to charge him with breaking and entering, theft of documents. But he's insisting he needs to explain. Says you deserve to know the truth." Truth, that word again, heavy with implications. I looked at Maria, who squeezed my hand and nodded. "You need to hear it," she said softly. "Whatever it is, you need to know." They brought David into the room, still cuffed, his eyes red-rimmed and devastated. He couldn't meet my gaze at first, just stared at the table between us like it held all the answers he needed. "Miss Eleanor," he finally whispered, "I'm so sorry." "I'm so sorry. Why?" The word came out broken, barely more than a breath. "Why would you do this to me, David?" He looked up then, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Because I'm broke," he said. "Because I made bad investments, and I'm drowning in debt, and I was desperate. And Aunt Rebecca, she came to me 6 months ago with a proposal. She said if I helped her contest the will, if I testified that Dad wasn't in his right mind, we could split the value of the property. She'd get the land, I'd get cash to clear my debts, and we'd both walk away clean." The words were knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "You were going to lie about your father?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You were going to lie about me?" "I wasn't going to at first," David said quickly, desperately. "I told her no. But then my creditors started threatening legal action, and my wife, she was talking about leaving, about taking the kids. I was going to lose everything, Miss Eleanor. And I thought, maybe if I could just find something in your papers, something that showed Dad gave you the house as payment for some specific service. We could argue it was a business transaction instead of a gift. Not fraud, just a technicality. Something that would let Rebecca take the property back without making you look bad. Without making me look bad." I repeated, and I heard the bitterness in my own voice, sharp as broken glass. "David, you were in my home, going through my private things, looking for ways to take away the only security I've ever had. How is that not making me look bad?" "I know," he sobbed. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But I was desperate, and I kept thinking about how you always said you never cared about money or possessions, about how you were rich in love and memories. I thought maybe you'd understand, maybe you'd even agree to let the property go if it meant helping me. I thought, you thought wrong," I said, and the finality in my voice made him flinch. "You thought I'd give up my home because you made bad choices? Because you couldn't manage your money? David, I spent 42 years living in other people's houses, sleeping in other people's rooms, never having anything of my own. Your father gave me this cottage because he understood that, because he wanted me to finally have a place where I belonged. And you were willing to take that away from me to save yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Detective Barnes shifted in her seat, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. Maria's hand tightened on mine, grounding me, keeping me from shattering into 1,000 pieces. "What were you going to do with the documents?" Detective Barnes asked, her voice cutting through the tension. David wiped his face with his shoulder, awkward with his hand still cuffed. "I was going to photograph them and send them to Aunt Rebecca's lawyer. He was looking for anything that showed Miss Eleanor had financial leverage over Dad, or that Dad was confused about the value of what he was giving away. I thought if I could just find the right paperwork. You thought you could build a case to steal my home? I finished for him. That's what you're describing, David. Theft, conspiracy, betrayal. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. Miss Eleanor, you raised me. You were more of a parent to me than my own mother. I love you. I didn't know what else to do. I stood up then, my legs steadier than I expected, my voice clearer. You didn't know what else to do except the right thing. You could have come to me and told me the truth about your debts. You could have asked for help instead of trying to destroy me. But you didn't. You chose to betray me instead. I turned to Detective Barnes. I want to press charges, all of them. And I want a restraining order. David made a sound like a wounded animal. Miss Eleanor, please. No, I said, and the word came out strong, final. I've spent my whole life putting other people's needs before my own. I've sacrificed and served and loved without condition. But I won't sacrifice my home. I won't sacrifice my dignity. Not even for you. They led David away, and I sat back, down, suddenly exhausted, feeling every one of my 65 years. Maria wrapped her arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into her. This woman I'd known for only 2 months, but who had proven more loyal than the boy I'd raised for 7 years. What happens now? I asked Detective Barnes. She consulted her notes, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Carmichael will be charged with breaking and entering, theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Given that he used a key you'd given him, his lawyer might argue he had permission to be there. But the fact that he took documents without your knowledge and was working with his aunt to contest the will makes the intent clear. And honestly, Miss Washington, his confession just now, that's going to make this case pretty straightforward. She paused and added more gently, I'd recommend you contact a lawyer too. Not for the criminal case, but for the civil one with the aunt. What Mr. Carmichael did here, it actually helps your position. It shows the lengths they were willing to go to challenge the will, which undermines their claims of legitimate concern about your former employer's mental state. I nodded, trying to process everything, trying to understand how my life had become this complicated legal mess. I don't have money for lawyers, I said quietly. Detective Barnes exchanged a glance with Maria, then said, There are legal aid organizations that help seniors with estate disputes. And given what happened here, I suspect you'll find lawyers willing to take your case pro bono. This kind of thing, it doesn't sit right with most people. Over the next few days, as word spread about David's arrest, something unexpected happened. The story made the local news. Local woman's adopted family turns against her over inheritance. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters, from lawyers offering their services, from neighbors I barely knew expressing their support. Mrs. Chun organized a meal train, and suddenly my refrigerator was full of casseroles and soups from people who'd heard my story and wanted to help. The church choir threw me a benefit dinner, raising money for legal fees I might need. Maria refused to let me pay her for her cleaning services, insisting that friendship mattered more than money. And through it all, I felt something shifting inside me. For so long, I defined myself by the families I'd served, by my ability to care for others without asking for anything in return. I thought that made me noble, selfless, good. But maybe it had also made me a target. Maybe by never asserting my own worth, by always putting others first, I taught people that my needs didn't matter, that I could be set aside when it was convenient. That lesson ended now. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom for Rebecca Carmichael's civil suit, with a lawyer named Marcus Thompson representing me pro bono. Marcus was a black man in his 50s who'd grown up in foster care, raised by a series of women who'd given him love without obligation. When he'd heard my story, he called me personally, told me he was taking my case because women like me deserve someone to fight for them. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, less dramatic than what you see on TV, just wood paneling and fluorescent lights and a judge who looked tired before the proceedings even began. Rebecca sat on the opposite side with her expensive lawyer, her face carefully composed, refusing to look at me. David was noticeably absent. He'd taken a plea deal for his criminal charges and was serving 6 months in county jail with probation to follow. The hearing was supposed to be about whether Mr. James had been mentally competent when he changed his will, about whether I'd exercised undue influence. But Marcus had other plans. He stood up, commanding attention in his simple dark suit, and addressed the judge with a calm authority that made me sit straighter. "Your Honor, we're here today because Ms. Carmichael believes her brother wasn't in his right mind when he chose to thank a woman who'd spent 7 years caring for his son with genuine love and dedication. She believes that a black woman who worked as a nanny couldn't possibly deserve to own property without having stolen it somehow." Rebecca's lawyer objected immediately, claiming Marcus was introducing race where it wasn't relevant, but Marcus pressed on. "It's absolutely relevant, Your Honor, because this case is built on assumptions about who deserves what, about whose service matters and whose doesn't. Ms. Washington has letters from Mr. James Carmichael explicitly stating his intentions. She has testimony from his son before his son's criminal conviction for attempting to steal documents from her home, confirming his father's sound mind. She has medical records showing Mr. James lived for months after changing his will with no signs of cognitive decline. What she doesn't have is anyone questioning whether Mr. James had the right to do what he wanted with his own property." He pulled out a thick folder and began distributing copies to the judge and opposing counsel. "These are letters spanning 7 years, Your Honor. Letters from Mr. James to his sister, to his friends, to his colleagues, all mentioning Miss Eleanor by name, praising her dedication, calling her family. Here's one from 2 weeks before the will change. Rebecca, I've been thinking about my mortality lately, and I realize that the person who's been most consistently present in my life these past years isn't blood family, it's Eleanor. She's earned something permanent from me." I watched Rebecca's face tighten as Marcus read her brother's words aloud. Watched her lawyer shuffle papers, looking for some angle, some argument that would counter the plain truth of those letters. "And here," Marcus continued, pulling out another document, "is the police report from 3 months ago, detailing how Ms. Carmichael's nephew broke into Miss Washington's home, attempting to steal documents to support this very lawsuit. A criminal conspiracy, Your Honor, that shows the true motivation here isn't concern for Mr. James's welfare. It's greed." The judge, a white woman probably in her early 60s, studied the documents carefully, then looked over her reading glasses at Rebecca. "Ms. Carmichael, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you know your nephew is planning to break into Miss Washington's home?" Rebecca's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head. "Your Honor, I simply wanted what was rightfully my family's. That property has been in our family that property belonged to your brother." The judge interrupted, her voice sharp. "And your brother had every legal right to give it to whomever he chose. I've reviewed the medical records. I've read the depositions. I've examined Mr. James's correspondence. There's absolutely no evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. What I see is a man who wanted to thank someone who'd enriched his life and a family member who disagrees with his choice." She set the papers down with a finality that made my heart race. "The petition to overturn the will is denied. Miss Washington's ownership of the property is confirmed and legally sound. Furthermore, I'm awarding Miss Washington her legal fees." to be paid by the petitioner, as the suit was clearly without merit and caused unnecessary distress. The gavel came down, and it was over. Just like that, after months of fear and worry and sleepless nights, it was over. I felt Maria's hand grip mine, felt Marcus lean over to whisper, "You won, Miss Eleanor. You won." But as I looked across the courtroom at Rebecca, gathering her papers with trembling hands, her face red with humiliation and anger, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and old, because winning meant nothing had to change in the systems that made women like me vulnerable in the first place. It meant I'd fought off this particular threat, but there would always be another one waiting. As we left the courtroom, reporters crowded around, asking for comments, wanting sound bites about justice and vindication. Marcus shielded me, guiding me through the crowd to his car. But before we could escape, I heard Rebecca's voice cutting through the noise. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she called out, her composure finally cracking. Taking advantage of a sick old man, stealing from his family, I stopped walking, turned around, looked at this woman who'd never known me, never cared about me, had only seen me as an obstacle to her inheritance. "I have nothing to be ashamed of," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I worked honestly for 42 years. I loved your brother's son like he was my own. And when your brother offered me a home, I accepted it gratefully as a gift freely given. You're angry because you believe I didn't deserve it. But Rebecca, your brother thought I did. And his opinion is the only one that mattered." I didn't wait for her response. Just turned and let Marcus guide me away, feeling lighter than I had in months. The next few weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost strange after so much chaos. The news coverage died down. The neighbors stopped bringing casseroles. Life returned to its quiet rhythm of morning coffee on the porch, afternoons in the garden, evenings with Mrs. Chong and our mahjong games. Maria continued coming on Tuesdays, though now we spent more time talking than cleaning, sharing stories and laughter like the old friends we'd become. But something had changed in me, something fundamental that I couldn't quite name. One evening, about a month after the court hearing, I sat on my porch watching the sun set behind the old oak tree, and I realized what it was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to myself. Not to a family I was employed by, not to children who needed raising, not to anyone's expectations of who I should be or what I should want. Just to myself, in my own home, living my own life. David wrote me a letter from jail. It came on plain white paper, his handwriting shaky, full of apologies and explanations and pleas for forgiveness. He talked about the pressure he'd been under, the mistakes he'd made, how prison had given him time to think about what really mattered. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he hoped that someday, maybe years from now, I might find it in my heart to let him try to make amends. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, the way I'd always forgiven the children I'd raised when they made mistakes. That instinct to nurture, to excuse, to smooth over hurt feelings, it ran deep in me, deeper than bone. But another part of me, a newer part, the part that had learned to value my own worth, knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, didn't mean letting him back into my life like nothing had happened. He'd tried to take my home. He'd betrayed my trust. And while I could forgive him for being weak, for being desperate, I couldn't trust him with my heart again. Not now, maybe not ever. I wrote back, keeping it brief. "David, I forgive you because holding on to anger would hurt me more than it would hurt you. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You made choices that showed me who you really are when things get hard. I hope you become a better man through this experience. I hope you learn that the people who love you are worth more than money or property or pride. But I won't be part of your life going forward. Take care of yourself. I sealed the envelope and mailed it, and with it went the last ties to the family I'd served for 7 years. It hurt less than I'd expected. Or maybe I just learned that some hurts are necessary, like setting a broken bone, painful in the moment, but required for proper healing. Maria asked me once, over tea in my kitchen, whether I regretted giving so much of my life to other people's families. Whether the first wished I'd made different choices, had children of my own, built a more traditional life. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I don't regret the love I gave, I finally said. Those children I raised, the families I cared for, that was real, even if it didn't last. What I regret is not valuing myself as much as I valued them. Not believing I deserved to take up space, to have needs, to say no when something didn't serve me. I smiled at her, this friend who'd stood by me when I needed it most. But you know what? I'm learning. At 65 years old, I'm finally learning that my worth isn't measured by what I give to others. It's measured by how I honor the life God gave me to live. Maria reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. You're teaching me too, Miss Eleanor. Teaching me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. That being kind doesn't mean being weak. We sat together in comfortable silence after that. Two women who'd found friendship in unexpected places, who understood the particular loneliness of spending your life caring for others while wondering if anyone would care for you. The church choir became my sanctuary in those months of healing. Every Sunday, I'd stand with the altos, my voice blending with Mrs. Patterson's and young Kaisha's and old Mr. Monroe's bass rumbling beneath us all. There was something healing about singing songs of faith and redemption, about being part of something larger than my own small story. After service one Sunday, Pastor Williams asked if I'd be willing to share my testimony with the congregation. Your story has touched a lot of hearts, Sister Eleanor, he said, his kind face creased with concern. Folks have been talking about what you went through, how you stood up for yourself. I think there are people here who need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. Especially with family. I agreed, though the thought terrified me. The following Sunday, I stood at the podium in my best dress, looking out at faces I'd come to know, neighbors and friends and strangers who'd become community. My hands shook as I gripped the edges of the wooden stand, but my voice came out steady. I want to talk to you today about the difference between service and servitude, I began. For most of my life, I thought being a good Christian woman meant saying yes to everything, giving everything, sacrificing everything for others. I thought that's what love looked like. But what happened to me these past months taught me something different. It taught me that real love, the kind God calls us to, requires boundaries. It requires knowing your own worth. Because when you don't value yourself, you teach other people not to value you either. I told them about my years as a nanny, about the families I'd loved and lost, about the home I'd finally received and nearly lost again. I told them about David's betrayal and Rebecca's lawsuit and the moment I decided to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, I said, my voice growing stronger. Say no to people who want to take advantage of your kindness. Say no to family members who think love means never setting limits. Say no to the voice in your own head that tells you you're not worthy of the blessings that come your way. When I finished, the silence in that church was absolute. Then someone started clapping, Mrs. Chen, sitting in the back row, even though she wasn't Christian, there just to support her friend. Others joined in, and soon the whole congregation was on their feet, applauding not for me, but for the truth we'd all needed to hear. Afterward, people came up to share their own stories. The woman who'd let her sister borrow money she never repaid. The man whose adult children expected him to babysit every weekend without ever saying thank you. The young mother who'd finally told her parents she couldn't host every holiday anymore. We were all learning the same lesson, just in different ways. That loving others starts with loving yourself enough to know where you end, and may begin. Summer arrived, and with it came the joy of watching my garden flourish. Those tomato plants I'd started back in spring were heavy with fruit now, red and ripe, and more than I could possibly eat myself. So I started sharing them with Maria, with Mrs. Chun, with the neighbors up and down the street. I'd leave bags of tomatoes on doorsteps with little notes from Eleanor's garden. Enjoy. It felt good to give from abundance rather than scarcity, to share because I wanted to rather than because I felt obligated to. One afternoon, as I was weeding around my zinnias, I heard footsteps on the path behind me. I turned to find a young woman standing there, maybe 30 years old, with a little girl holding her hand. "Miss Eleanor?" The woman asked hesitantly. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Emma Harrington." "Well, Emma Mitchell now. You were my nanny when I was little, back in Nashville." My breath caught. Emma, one of the twin girls I cared for in my very first nanny job, 42 years ago. "Emma," I breathed, standing up and brushing dirt from my knees. "My goodness, look at you. All grown up with a daughter of your own." She smiled, and I saw the little girl she'd been in that grown woman's face. "This is Sophie. She's 4. We're in town visiting my in-laws, and Mom told me you lived here now." I wanted Sophie to meet the woman who taught me what love looks like. Tears stung my eyes as I knelt down to Sophie's level. "Hello, sweet girl. Your mama and I go way back. Did she tell you I used to make her Mickey Mouse pancakes?" Sophie giggled and shook her head, and Emma laughed. "I was actually hoping you might teach me how. I've tried, but they never turn out right." And Sophie, well, she's at that age where she's obsessed with Mickey Mouse. We spent the afternoon together, the 3 of us, sitting on my porch drinking lemonade while I showed Emma pictures from those early years and told Sophie stories about her mama as a little girl. Emma told me about her life. She was a pediatric nurse, married to a good man, raising 2 children with the kind of patience and love I'd modeled for her. "Miss Eleanor," she said as they were getting ready to leave, "I want you to know that you made a difference in my life. The way you cared for Grace and me, the way you made us feel safe and loved, that shaped who I became. I know we didn't keep in touch after you left, and I'm sorry for that, but you were never forgotten." After they left, I sat on my porch until the fireflies came out, turning those words over in my mind. You were never forgotten. Maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need to own the families I'd served or have them owe me anything. Maybe it was enough to know that I'd done good work, that I'd shaped lives in ways I'd never fully see, that my love had rippled out into the world through the children I'd raised. As fall approached and the leaves on the old oak tree began to turn gold, I found myself settling into a contentment I'd never quite felt before. My days had a rhythm that belonged to me: morning coffee and Bible reading, afternoons in the garden or with friends, evenings on the porch watching the world go by. Maria and I had started volunteering together at the community center, helping immigrant families navigate the complex systems of American life. We'd teach English classes, help with job applications, connect people with resources they needed. It felt good to use everything I'd learned in my years of service to help others, but this time on my own terms, from a place of strength rather than obligation. One October evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Really looked at myself for maybe the first time in years. I saw the lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair, the softness of age in my face. But I also saw something new, a steadiness in my gaze, a peace in my expression. I looked like a woman who knew who she was, Who knew what she'd survived? Who knew finally what she deserved? You did good, Eleanor, I whispered to that reflection. You did real good. And standing there in my own bathroom, in my own home, with my own life stretching out ahead of me, however many years I had left, I believed it. Not because anyone had validated me or thanked me or given me permission to feel that way, but because I'd learned the most important lesson of all, that my worth had been there all along, waiting for me to recognize it, that every sacrifice I'd made, every child I'd loved, every family I'd served, it had all been valuable and meaningful, but it had never been the measure of whether I deserved to take up space in this world. I'd always deserved that from the day I was born until the day I'd die. It had just taken 65 years and one betrayal to finally believe it. They say time heals all wounds, and maybe that's true, or maybe we just get better at living with the scars. A year after David went to jail, after the lawsuit ended, after my life settled into its new normal, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name and address in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate flowers along the lid. And inside the box was a letter from Mr. James Carmichael. My hands shook as I unfolded the yellowed paper, dated just a few weeks before he'd moved to Arizona. Dear Eleanor, it began. By the time you read this, I'll either be gone or too far away to deliver this myself. And I'm trusting my lawyer to make sure it reaches you when the time is right. I've written this letter because I need you to know something I was never brave enough to say to your face. You saved my son's life. Not figuratively, but literally. When David came to live with me after the divorce, he was more than angry. He was dangerously depressed. I found pills hidden in his room, a note he'd written but not yet acted on. I was terrified, paralyzed, drowning in my own grief and helplessness. And then you came into our lives. I had to stop reading, pressing my hand to my mouth as tears streamed down my face. I'd never known. David had never told me. Mr. James had never said a word. You saw what I couldn't see, the letter continued. You understood what he needed, not therapy or medication, though those came later, but simply someone who showed up every single day with steady, unconditional love. You taught him that life was worth living through 1,000 small acts of care. You taught him that he mattered. By the time he went to college, he was whole again, healed in ways I could never have managed on my own. I owed you more than money could repay, but the house was all I had to give. I'm sorry it caused you trouble. I'm sorry my sister and my son became people I wouldn't recognize. But I'm not sorry I gave it to you. You earned it 1,000 times over, and I hope you fill it with the peace and joy you've always deserved. The letter was signed simply James, and tucked beneath it was a photograph I'd never seen before. Mr. James and David and me, taken at David's high school graduation. We were all smiling, David in the middle with his arms around both of us, looking healthy and happy and alive. On the back, in Mr. James's handwriting, my family. The one that mattered. I sat with that letter and that photograph for a long time, crying for the father who trusted me with his son's life, for the boy who'd grown into a man I no longer knew, for the younger version of myself who'd loved without knowing the full weight of what that love was holding up. But I also cried with gratitude. Gratitude that my life, however imperfect, however marked by sacrifice and loss, had mattered. That I'd saved a life without even knowing I was doing it. That my love, freely given, had been exactly what someone needed, exactly when they needed it. That evening, I called Maria and Mrs. Chun and a few other friends I'd made, and I invited them over for dinner. I cooked a feast, my mama's fried chicken recipe, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie. We crowded around my little kitchen table, laughing and telling stories and celebrating nothing in particular except the gift of being alive, being together, being women who'd survived and thrived despite everything trying to break us. I want to make a toast, I said, raising my glass of sweet tea. To second chances. To learning our worth. To the families we're born into and the families we choose. And to the truth, because even when it hurts, even when it costs us everything, it's the only thing that sets us free. We clinked our glasses together, and in that moment, surrounded by friends in my own home, eating food I'd cooked because I wanted to and not because someone was paying me to, I felt it. Freedom. Real, deep, soul-level freedom. The kind that comes not from having everything you want, but from wanting everything you have. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to apologize for taking up space. The kind that comes from understanding that your worth was never up for debate. It was written into your bones the day you were born, and no one's betrayal, no one's lawsuit, no one's doubts could ever erase it. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was washing dishes in my kitchen, I looked out the window at the old oak tree silhouetted against the darkening sky, and I thought about all the years I'd spent serving others. I didn't regret them. Every child I'd raised, every family I cared for, every sacrifice I'd made, it had all been part of the journey that led me here, to this kitchen, in this house, living this life that was finally, completely, beautifully mine. And I realized something that felt almost like a revelation. The betrayal, as much as it had hurt, had been a gift. It had forced me to fight for myself in a way I'd never done before. It had shown me who my real friends were. It had taught me that boundaries weren't selfish, they were sacred. It had cracked me open and let out all the old beliefs about who I had to be and what I had to accept, making room for something new to grow. I thought about David in his jail cell, about Rebecca living with the knowledge of what she'd done, about Mr. James in Arizona, or perhaps already gone from this world, having left behind his final gift of truth. I thought about all the families scattered across the country who'd once employed me, going about their lives, probably never thinking about the nanny who'd raised their children. And I thought about Emma, teaching her daughter to be kind because a nanny 40 years ago had shown her what kindness looked like. We're all connected, I realized, in ways we can't always see. Every act of love ripples outward, touching lives in ways we'll never fully know. Every act of betrayal does too. We're all just doing our best with the broken pieces we've been given, trying to make something beautiful out of the mess. That night, before I went to sleep, I pulled out a journal I'd started keeping since the trial ended. Writing down my thoughts had become a way of processing everything, of making sense of the chaos. I wrote, "Today I learned something important. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing or letting people back into your life. It means releasing the weight of their choices so you can walk forward unencumbered. It means accepting that people will disappoint you, betray you, fail you, and choosing not to let that define your worth or destroy your capacity for joy. It means understanding that their brokenness is not your responsibility to fix." I paused, pen hovering over paper, thinking about everything I wanted to say, everything I'd learned. Then I wrote the truest thing I knew. That day, I learned that sometimes the truth may hurt, but it's the only thing that sets you free. I closed the journal and turned off the light, settling into my own bed, in my own room, in my own home. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I've been searching for my whole life. Peace. Not the absence of pain or struggle or uncertainty, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're supposed to be, living exactly the life you're meant to live. The truth had set me free, and tomorrow I'd wake up and keep living in that freedom, one day at a time, for however many days I had left. If my story touched your heart, my dear, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the truth deserves to be heard.